So welcome to everyone. We are here to talk about a really important topic, planning to protect that perfect pet. So we all have that perfect pet, right? Whether it's a dog, a cat. I have friends who have parakeets. Some of those birds live for like 50 years, but we hope that we're going to have dogs the rest of our lives. And what's going to happen to our dog or our cat or our special pet after we're gone? How can we make sure that they have that safety net, that they have that structure there? That's what we're here to talk about today. I'm Mark Gilfix. I'm here with my amazing colleague, Nick Klingenberg. Nick is a member of our team, a valued member of our team. For those of you who don't know him, he's been a part of our team. How long have you been with our firm now?
It'll be 5 years in September.
Years. Amazing. And so Nick comes with an incredible background. Do you still license in New York?
Yes, I am. Yep.
So if you have New York issues, he can help with that. But Nick is a master of everything we do. We all work together on these issues. He was just awarded a super lawyer designation, a rising star. He's an incredible member of our team, and I'm really excited to have him here today to talk about this issue of planning for pets. And those of you who know me or don't know me, I've been with our firm almost 10 years now as a partner here at Gilfix and Lopole Associates. And for those of you, I think most people here probably know our firm, but those of you who don't, and actually Nick, I want to add, was a 30 under 30 honoree in 2017. He's also the proud parent of Henry, which there he is. So
it wouldn't be complete without that photo.
Absolutely. So Henry is great, and Nick brings a lot of experience. He's helped many families with planning for pets. And as the proud dad, or however you want to call it, of Henry, this is something that's personal to him. My family's had dogs my whole life. I had a puppy, black lab puppy named Pepper. We had a yellow lab named Daphne. Both of them are gone now, but now my parents have an adorable, I think he's a golden retriever poodle mix named Poji, and he's fantastic. He's been in our office a little bit. So these issues are very personal to so many of us, and it's a part of what we do. And for those of you who don't know our firm, we are Gilfix and Lopole Associates. We're very proud of our heritage. We've been in the Bay Area for actually over 35 years now. We serve thousands of families throughout the state of California, from San Diego all the way up to Wairika. So we can serve people throughout the state of California. We really focus exclusively on estate planning, tax planning, special needs planning, and really legal planning for families. And pets are part of our families, right? We love our dogs, we love our cats. We have a lot of clients who don't have kids, but they have pets and they want to make absolutely sure that their pets are taken care of. Or even if you have kids, but you also have pets, how can you make sure that there's that safety net there for your pets? And that's what this is all about. We want to make sure those little furry loved ones are covered. So on that note, I'll turn it over to you, Nick, and you can take us through today's presentation.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone who's attending the webinar. As Mark said, it's an important topic, especially to us pet owners out there. To start, I wanted to outline the agenda for our webinar. So we'll start with some fun facts about pets that's not referenced on this slide, but then we'll dive into some of the unique planning challenges that pets pose and why they're so difficult to plan for and what can be done about it to make sure that your pet is cared for if you become incapacitated or if you pass away, including pet-specific planning opportunities, both in the near term and the long term, all of which are very important to understanding and taking the proper steps to make sure your planning documents reflect what you want to have happen with and for your pet. Oops, let's see, it's not letting me, oh, there we go, perfect. So starting with the fun facts about pets. So 380 million people in the United States. I'm not sure how many households that consists of, but nearly 2/3 of homes in the United States include at least one pet, with the largest bulk of pets being dogs, but cats is a close second, along with fish, birds, reptiles, horses, and exotic animals. So there are a lot of pets out there. This doesn't even really include all the pets, because technically you could talk about domesticated animals like cows and sheep, goats. So the list goes on and on. But the same issues apply. And as we'll talk about in a minute, depending on the type of pet, there may be other issues that apply just because of certain animals' longevity. Like you said, Mark, parakeets can live for 25 to 40 years. We'll talk about one turtle that lived for 250 years. So we've got a longevity question to which we have to find an answer as we plan. Why do people have pets? If we look at the first bullet here, you would say, well, gee, that's an expense I don't otherwise need. Over $1,100 a year for maintaining your pet. This would include toys, care, food, vet bills, etc. To me, that seems a little low, but it does go into, when we talk about long-term, how much money do I have to allocate for the pet is usually a big question. And if we keep that number in mind, we can see how, if we're talking about 250 years plus inflation, a lot of money could go into sustaining your pet long-term. From a health perspective, there are reasons why people have pets. And indeed, there are studies that show that having a pet can lead to several benefits from a health perspective: lower blood pressure, lower cholesterol, increased physical activity. And the third bullet here, particularly relevant with respect to the pandemic, I know there was a huge increase in pet ownership during the pandemic, primarily to help reduce feelings of loneliness and isolation, caused by being locked in, etc. Largely the goal here, or the overarching theme, is that pets generally correlate with happiness. And for that reason, we also want to make sure their happiness is maintained should something happen to us. Somewhat uniquely, the law has not caught up to society in terms of how it treats pets. This may be offensive to some participating in the webinar, but the law technically does define your beloved animal as a piece of personal property. So it is the equivalent of your furniture, your desk, your books, your clothing, your cookware, all of that long list of things that you wouldn't necessarily think is equivalent to a pet, but unfortunately the law classifies them as part of the same category. Notwithstanding that classification, there are some additional protections provided to pets. In California, we've had additional protections since 1872. The legislature then declared that animals were sentient beings that would rise above your dresser, your bookcase, etc., your furnishings. There are also some provisions of the law that encourage the proper treatment of animals, which I think is a good thing. Under this section of the Civil Code here, if you are found to have caused wrongful injuries to an animal, you could be held civilly liable. And under these two sections of the Penal Code, the first one, if you harm an animal willfully or wrongfully, you could go to jail for up to 1 year and face a $20,000 fine. Or under the second section of the Penal Code, even for improper care of an animal, you could be convicted of a misdemeanor. So, bit of a gray area when it comes to how pets are treated under the law, technically personal property, but given protections that would not otherwise apply to other types of personal property. In the same vein as they're occupying a unique status in the law, planning for pets is uniquely challenging for several reasons. If we're going to contrast them to furniture, again, unlike furniture, pets move around, they interact, they have volition, they have needs that furniture does not have, while at the same time, they don't rise to the level of being truly able to sustain themselves independently, at least in modern society. We're talking about wild animals, that's a different question, but typically a pet is not able to subsist without its human caregiver. And on that point, a pet, unlike the furniture, cannot be just stuck in a storage unit and left for the estate administration to proceed. They need attention and devotion day to day or hour by hour or constantly, depending on the pet. So that's a unique challenge as well. Finally, as we had referenced earlier, some pets live longer or much longer than the average human. On the slide, we have Tommy the tortoise, who in that photo had celebrated his 121st birthday. In preparing this slide, there are actually two Tommy the tortoises out there. This one passed away, I think, but it would have been 124 years old had it been alive today. And when it died, it had 3 generations of human caregivers. So just 3 generations shows you how difficult it can be to think long-term about who's going to manage the affairs of the pet. The other Tommy the tortoise, just as an aside, still alive. He's estimated to be 250 years old. He lives on a reserve in Zimbabwe, so a bit more like the wild animal element, but still, long-term care is necessary for him because 250 years is much greater than the average human being's lifespan. So having a succession plan in place is important, or if critical, should I say. So how do we do that? How do we plan for our pets. And they can be divided, the planning can be divided into two categories. One relates to sickness or incapacity. You're alive, but you have some event where you're not able to communicate, or you're just not able to care for your pet, even though you're alive. And then the other is when you pass away. This has a two-pronged question. What happens to the pet? Who's going to own the pet when you pass away? Who's going to care for the pet when you pass away? And the other question is, how is that care going to be funded? Is there going to be a planning vehicle in place for the pet? We'll explore these points as we proceed. Talking about incapacity then, it's important to understand where a power of attorney can fit in and how that power of attorney, which is a document that gives your agent powers over your non-trust legal, financial, and governmental affairs, how that document can be leveraged to make sure your pets are taken care of. And indeed, as part of our planning, when it comes to pets, we always include language that allows the agent and the power of attorney to take immediate steps with respect to the pet. I'll show some sample language in a moment, but generally the focus is making sure the pet is able to get the necessary veterinary and grooming care, and that your agent is able to access the pet wherever it may be, in your home or in a stable or on the farm, whatever animal we are talking about. The agent needs to be able to access the pet and make sure it's being taken care of. Another point is, and for our clients who have a revocable trust, a wrinkle is that the powers between the trustee and the agent in the power of attorney have to be synergized. So here, we want to make sure that both the trustee, who's the person who has control of the trust funds, has authority to expend trust funds for the benefit of the pet. This would also need to be synergized with the language in the power of attorney, since the agent in the power of attorney would be the one dealing with the direct management of the pet's affairs. So usually it's the same person in both roles, but the documents need to be synergized to make sure every base is covered. From a less legal perspective, it's important to have a designated informed caregiver who knows about the pet. So this would be almost like when we talk about a minor child, you want to make sure that whoever's going to be the guardian for the child has some understanding about the child's needs and wishes and wants and likes and dislikes. The same would go for your pet. Each pet is unique. I could certainly say that our dog is unique and has his own unique needs. So it's important that the person who you envision caring about the pet and caring for the pet knows enough about the pet to affect that goal. Keeping the caregiver informed about the plan and the pet's desires and needs is critical so that person can assume authority should something happen to you. Beyond just that caregiver, it's important to have an updated list of emergency contacts. So that way, if you're unable to communicate because you're incapacitated, the people who take over the management of your affairs can look to a list and say, okay, here are the people we need to call about the pet. And for me, that would include the vet, the groomer, and relatively recently, we had to call the 24/7 emergency care hotline because Henry had injured his leg. So having that number on hand is important so that way people don't have to search for it in a time of need. So updating the list of emergency contacts and keeping it up to date is an important non-legal aspect of a broad plan for your pets. Like I said, we have some language in our power of attorney, some excerpts that I have here. Highlighted in bold are the key terms. So like I said, care and well-being being paramount, making sure the agent has the authority to deal with veterinary and grooming needs, along with health. And giving broad authority is important because you can never envision long-term every single thing that could arise. So giving carte blanche to the agent, like in the second paragraph, ensuring to the greatest extent practicable, make sure the agent has any and all authority that he or she may need. Just a note on reimbursement and compensation, which is in the last paragraph, it's important to have these powers so that way, if your incapacity, particularly if your incapacity lasts for a long time, you don't want the pet to become a burden to the agent or the attorney, in fact. At that point, if it were, the agent would be discouraged or would have an impediment to assuming this role. So making sure your agent can reimburse himself for expenses he may lay out on behalf of the pet, and depending on how much time is expended with respect to the care of the pet, you may want to, and we usually do, authorize compensation to the attorney, in fact, or agent for the time devoted to the care. Some pets require a lot more devotion than others, but still making sure your agent is paid for his services is important in making sure the agent wants to rise to the task when called upon. Turning to post-death, here we don't have to worry about you being alive, but we do have to worry about a whole host of other issues. So they're identified here in terms of number one being who gets the pet. So you're not around. Is there someone in your family who would take the pet and want the pet? Or are we looking to an organization or a sanctuary who would take care of the pet and make sure that he or she is given the best care for the rest of his or her life? And next question would be, how is the pet going to be cared for? Again, is it going to be a sanctuary or is it going to be an individual? Is the pet going to join a community? Maybe you have a friend who has one dog and you want to just add yours to the friend's horde. That's perfectly fine as long as these issues are discussed and the planning is put into place. Another key question that we often encounter with respect to post-death planning is, should the recipient or the caregiver be paid? Meaning, like the agent that we were just discussing a moment ago, there is a time element to caring for someone's pet. So should that person be paid? Should there be a stipend attached to the disposition of the pet? And indeed, on that point, this is some language that we've encountered before. You bequeath $5,000 to your son with the wish and hope that he'll care for your beloved dog, Henry. Now, this language is not necessarily ideal for several reasons, but the key for the purpose of this webinar is that we would call this language precatory, meaning it has wish and hope language, which is not necessarily legally enforceable. In this scenario, the beloved son, or the fictitious son in this example, could theoretically take the $5,000 and forget all about Henry. There's no teeth to this kind of bequest, and that's why advanced planning like a pet trust, which we'll talk about in a moment, is important. The other final key question we usually encounter, especially when dealing with a pet with a long lifespan, is who's going to be around? What if there is no one who can care for my pet for 250 years? Well, we need to think then, are there going to be a professional fiduciary, or is there going to be a bank involved to manage at least the funds that belong to the pet? Or would something like a sanctuary be appropriate for the long-term day-to-day care of the pet that could live another 200 years? So all of these issues would have to be explored as we think about, should we put together a pet-oriented plan for you? Historically speaking, there weren't many options. You basically had to rely on the bequest the language I just cited a moment ago. I give you $5,000 and I hope you care for my pet. Now, for people who want to sort of pass away knowing that their wishes are going to be followed, that language doesn't really necessarily solve that problem. Another option that was historically popular was you could bequeath the animal and some money, if you were feeling generous, to animal organizations that would sort of vaguely ensure that the pet had a suitable home or would otherwise care for the pet. Fortunately, in the 1950s, this sort of gray area started to change with the development of the animal rights movement. And while that movement covered a lot of other areas of law, the trust and estates attorney saw an opportunity to update the planning law to involve a specialized structure that was originally known as an honorary trust. At least that's how it was called in New York. Here in California, it's called the Trust for Care of an Animal. But in simple parlance, we like to say a pet trust. So taking a step back with respect to trusts in general, the key difference between a pet trust and the other kind of trust that we might implement is that the trust basics do not necessarily work with the pet. And as an overview, a trust usually involves three parties: the settlor, who's the person who creates the trust, the trustee, who's the person who carries out the terms of the trust, and the beneficiary, who's the one who benefits from the trust. Now, for any of you out there who have a revocable trust, you're principally the same three people, or the same person is serving in all three roles. So if I set up my revocable trust, I would name myself as the trustee and also be the lifetime beneficiary. But turning to the pet element and a trust that benefits another being, the challenge, or the way trusts work, or the way that the trust contract can be carried out, is that the beneficiary has certain rights to go after the trustee if the trustee is not doing what he or she's supposed to do. Now, with a pet, that's not quite possible because the pet's not able to speak up and file a lawsuit against the trustee. So that left the law in a bit of a quandary when looking at the trust that existed at the time. Enter the Petrust, which is a specialized structure available in every US jurisdiction that was specifically designed with this problem in mind, that how can you have a trust without a beneficiary that's able to enforce the rights under the trust? And to kind of get a handle on how a pet trust works, we have a diagram here that outlines the basics of a pet trust and how it's carried out. So as I explained in the prior slide, the settlor, trustee, and beneficiary were the three primary members of a trust arrangement. As you can see from this, we have other parties involved. So we have a protector and we have a caregiver, along with a pet beneficiary and a remainder beneficiary. Now, just to explain briefly how this would work, let's say I'm the settlor. So I'm going to set up a trust for my beloved dog, Henry, in case I pass away. So that way some money is there for him if he outlives me and he could be cared for. I hand that money over to the trustee, who holds the money and invests it according to the trust instrument and in accordance with his legal goals or his goals in terms of income, capital growth, etc. The trust instrument will say, I direct the trustee to pay on behalf of the pet, whatever the pet may need for its health, education, maintenance, and support. Now, if the pet were a human, we could very easily ascertain what the human needed with respect to those standards. With an animal, it's a little bit more challenging, and that's where the caregiver role comes in that the caregiver is the one who may have custody of the pet and would likely have an understanding of the day-to-day needs of the pet long-term. So the caregiver could report to the trustee and say, hey, trustee, I need X amount of money for the pet, it needs new food, needs to see the vet, etc. The other role that's developed here is the role of the protector. So the protector kind of steps in the shoes of a beneficiary from the prior example. So where the pet here, the pet beneficiary here, doesn't actually have any ability to speak up and stand up for its rights, we have the role of the protector, who is able to step in to serve in that role in protecting the pet beneficiary's interests. So you see that there are several different reports here, and this is kind of how all the information flows about the administration of the trust. The trustee can ask for a report from the caregiver with respect to how the pet is doing. The protector can ask for the same kind of report from the caregiver and perhaps about how the trustee is distributing money for the caregiver to use for the pet. And the settlor can also get these reports if the settlor's alive and is interested in figuring out what's happening. So between the reports and the different roles, with an advanced pet trust like this, the pet is covered because there are ideally human beings who are looking out for the pet's interest and managing the pet's inheritance, so to speak, on behalf of the pet and in a positive way. The recourse here is if the trustee is, say, not distributing money appropriately or not investing the money appropriately, the protector is the one who could go to court and have the trustee removed or have a new caregiver appointed. So with this arrangement, in contrast to the prior, more basic revocable trust, we've given some teeth to other human beings to enforce the rights of the pet when the pet can't do it him or herself. If you were to set up a pet trust, as helpful as the diagram is, it doesn't answer all of the questions that have to go into putting a comprehensive pet trust in place. The two key issues here, especially where we're identifying a human to serve in a role, is who is going to serve as trustee and who's going to serve as the trust protector. Now, if we're talking about a tortoise, for instance, that's going to live for 250 years, we need to make sure we have enough people or a financial institution named in the documents, so that way there's that longevity piece. Relying on one human being for that kind of lifespan is not going to be enough, so thinking long-term is important. The question about money as well, do you want to leave your whole estate to your pet and then have it passed to other beneficiaries on the pet's death? Or is a pet trust going to be funded with a small amount of money, say $20,000 or $50,000? It's important to think about and comparing that the number that we described at the beginning of the webinar, how much is the annual sort of burn rate with respect to keeping the pet alive and making sure the pet's needs are met? A final challenge, especially where we practice in the Bay Area, relates to housing. You know, housing is not cheap, and the idea of holding a house in trust for the benefit of the pet may not necessarily be ideal, just because there may not be a human who occupies the home. So this is the question of, are we going to keep the house in trust? Is somebody going to be given a right to live with the pet in the house? Or are we going to fund housing in some other manner, like long-term boarding or a sanctuary with a financial incentive? All of these things we would have to explore as we talk about putting a pet trust in place. Going back to the long lifespan question, it's particularly challenging with young animals or animals with long lifespan. The longest living koi fish lived to be almost 230 years old. So if we're talking about long-term maintenance of that particular animal, that's a very long time, certainly multiple lifetimes and multiple generations. Same with the tortoise. We talked about the two Tommies. One was 124, the other is at least 250 years old. So for some of these more exotic animals, these questions need to be answered with a really long-term view. At the same time, it's important to provide balance in what we do, just because there have been cases where someone had set up a planning mechanism for their pet, and then things fell apart just because there was either not enough guidance or too much money. And to cite two examples here, we all remember Michael Jackson. So apparently he had a chimpanzee named Bubbles, to whom, and it's somewhat disputed, he left $2 million for his care. Now, litigation ensued, as litigation usually does, and ultimately the estate of Michael Jackson had to pay a chimpanzee sanctuary well over $2 million for having cared for Bubbles, and as a donation in exchange for the long-term care of the chimpanzee. So with proper planning, that could have all been avoided, and more money could have been there for Bubbles had the litigation not ensued. Contrast, somewhat famous in the New York market, is Leona Helmsley. She was known as the Queen of Mean, and she was so mean that she didn't want to leave any money to her heirs and only wanted to leave her estate to her dog there, Trouble. The dog Trouble ultimately was left over $100 million, over $12 million. The other beneficiaries of her estate said that that was far too much for a dog to need for its lifetime. And indeed, $10 million was directed away from the dog after a costly and protracted litigation, leaving Trouble with only $2 million, only $2 million. I don't know if it's still alive, but the point is, it's important to get these issues right so that way litigation can be avoided, especially when the pet, again, is not able to speak up and otherwise think about what it needs and participate in any kind of lawsuit. Now, a pet trust is not necessarily appropriate for everyone. There are people who would be comfortable with an informal arrangement. That would be, like I said at the beginning, I leave $5,000 and my dog Henry to my son. If you have a family member who is present in your or the pet's life, maybe a bequest like that would work, especially if that person is a child who's presumably going to outlive you and outlive the pet. Another informal arrangement that I might have mentioned earlier relates to just giving discretion to your trustee. So if you have a revocable trust, your trust may say, I leave my dog to my trustee so that he could find a suitable home for the dog. And that doesn't answer all the questions. It just kind of deflects that decision-making until the time has come for you and the trustee needs to act with respect to finding the pet its suitable and loving home. On the point of trustee, it's critical to make sure your trustee is up to the task, especially if it's a pet that's going to last for many years after your demise. In that scenario, your trustee will simultaneously be dealing with all of your personal affairs, but also dealing with caring for a pet. If the trustee doesn't like pets, for instance, then that may not be a good fit, and you might want to just specifically have a pet trustee who deals with this specific issue, short of having a formal pet trust. Finally, we always advocate, even in the non-pet realm, to have a letter of guidance with respect to your affairs and your wishes. This often comes up in the context of a child. You want to make sure you specify what your child's wishes and wants might be, likes and dislikes. Well, the same applies to your pet. You want to say, my dog Henry, he likes balls, he doesn't like this, he doesn't like this brand. So they have needs and wishes just like we do. And if you don't set them forth in a letter of guidance, how is anyone going to know? These are some informal arrangements that can work if a pet trust is otherwise inappropriate. Indeed, we can help. We're adept at preparing pet trusts. I've prepared many since I've been with the firm. We can make sure custom provisions are developed in your power of attorney, so that way your agent has all of the authority needed to care for your pets. We would review all the questions that are the rhetorical questions posed in this webinar about what are the pet's needs, what are your wishes with respect to the pets, and we would do a comprehensive review of decisions previously made or decisions to be made with an eye to making sure that the pet is appropriately cared for long-term. And on behalf of all the Gilfix and Lepole pet family, I thank you for attending. I note here, if you'd like to set a meeting, we have our number there or our email address. You can email my colleague Nadia, and she can set you up with an appointment. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mark for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. And we did get a couple questions here, but that was fantastic. And these are photos of actual dogs that are part of our staff families. Although I have to point out the bottom right is Daphne, and that was my parents' yellow lab, and sadly she passed away last year. So sending good wishes to Daphne. But these issues, I mean, dogs are members of our family. Cats are members of our family. Any pets can be. So I think it's just so crucial that we think about that. And as Nick talked about, depending on your situation, sometimes a separate trust is warranted. Sometimes something more informal can absolutely work. I had a client who they had a pretty valuable house in Los Altos, probably worth over $4 million, and they actually had kids, but they wanted to make sure that when they passed away, their dog could stay in their house as long as the dog was still living. So we actually prepared a sub trust within their living trust to say, hey, if our dog's still around, the house will not be sold, doesn't go to the kids yet. The dog gets to live there as long as he wants. And they left some money in that just in case. And then it was going to go to the kids. So we have clients with kids who set this up, clients without kids, of course. I think it's a higher priority. And there are informal solutions, and then there are the more formal. And the right decision kind of depends on your situation. And Nick, one question that I had was when you talked about the trust protector, the trustee, the beneficiary. What if you only have one person, or maybe at most two people, who you trust to be involved? What if you don't have that third person who you might name? What are the options then?
That's a challenge because unlike the standard trust where there's just three roles, you've got trustee, beneficiary, and settlor, you need a fourth role, and often finding a trustee is challenging enough, let alone a trust protector. And here you wouldn't want we wouldn't want the same person to serve in those roles, because you would lose the teeth that the trust protector has over the trustee. But there are animal rights organizations who could be asked to serve in this role, the trust protector role principally. The trustee role, as we deal with often, Mark, can be filled by a financial professional or a bank. It's just the trust protector role, you would definitely want to be looking to family members, friends, or an animal rights organization that could serve in that role.
And before we get just a couple more questions, if you did like this, share this. This is on YouTube, or will be on YouTube if you're watching this live. So if you have questions, if you want to refer back to slides, this of course is just for educational purposes. This is not pure legal advice. This is just to inform you of the tools available. But please feel free to subscribe, like the video, share it if you're watching it. We hope more people learn about what they can do to protect their pets after they're gone. And so, Nick, what would be the process if someone had a question, whether they're working with our firm, Gilfix and Lepole, already, or if they haven't yet? What is the process by which we would explore this and how we kind of help someone come up with the plan?
Sure. Well, typically any kind of estate planning decisions are made in a planning session where we would review the underlying assets, we would review any existing documents, and we would discuss in depth the goals that the client may want to affect. So if the pet were top of mind, that would be goal number one. And we would review all of the questions posed here, not in a rhetorical way, but in an actual way to try and tease out some decisions with respect to, is a pet trust appropriate, or is an informal arrangement appropriate? Do we have sufficient number of people who can be involved to make sure that the pet's going to be cared for? It would be all part of our comprehensive planning approach.
And really importantly, if you don't have an estate plan in place yet, you have to have a plan in place regardless for yourself. And that's, revocable living trust, power of attorney, advance directive for you. And as Nick alluded to, we can include specific language for your pet to make sure that your pet's covered, even if you're just incapacitated or sick. What if you're in a car accident? What if you get a bad case of COVID and are out of it for weeks? Who has the power to step in to financially care for your pet, not just step in to take, feed the pet and take care of him or her. So we want to make sure everything is linked together. If it's been a while since you reviewed your plan, we can always take a fresh look. And the way that we typically do things is we set planning meetings. We do typically bill for those meetings as we dive in and come up with a plan for you. And from that meeting, we would give you a specific step-by-step plan going forward, and we give you the exact fees that it would be. If you have questions about our firm, if you want to make sure we're a good fit, you can always call us, and we're happy to chat with you for 15 minutes just to get to know you, so you can better understand how we do things and how we can help you out. But we hope you got a lot out of this. Any other questions you wanted to address?
Yeah, let me see. I didn't check. Do we have any? Let's see. So yeah, like you said, Mark, it's going to be available online.
Yeah,
so
we'll share it. Yeah. And as far as cost, it really depends on the situation. We sit down with you and understand what your goals are. Is it part of sometimes we can build these within your living trust if it's one of the more simple solutions or in your power of attorney. Or sometimes, as Nick talked about, depending on the situation, it may make sense to set up a separate pet trust. So you'd have your own living trust. You'd say, when I pass away, whatever shares go to other people, but for my pet, I want this separate pet trust to govern what will happen, to make sure all my bases are covered. So it really depends on the situation. If you're not sure, set a meeting with us, call us, Nick, myself, Renee, Conrad, and our team, a great team. We all work together on these issues. I'll often go to Nick if I have questions about the right structure for a pet trust. So we all work together on these issues. And of course, we can help you with estate tax planning as well, special needs planning as well, as property tax planning, Prop 19 issues. Check out our Gilfix Law YouTube channel. We have other videos. Subscribe here if you like this. We have videos on a number of other topics. So we can help you in any area of planning, whether it's protecting your child, your pet, your home, no matter what issues you have. It's our privilege to get to help you with this. And we invite you to join our client community, of course. But regardless, we hope you got a lot out of this video, and share it, spread the wealth, let other people know about these really powerful tools out there, because again, for so many of us, pets are family. So let's make sure those precious dogs like Henry are covered if something happens to us. Any final notes, Nick, before we wrap this up?
No, I mean, just looking at all the faces here on this screen, how could you not want to plan for those faces? Make sure they're cared for.
Exactly. I love it. So, and on that note, I hope everybody's staying safe, sane, and healthy. Check out the Gilfix Lapolo YouTube channel for more information, but contact us if we can help you with this. Gilfix.com is our website. On that note, thank you all so much, and hope everybody's staying well.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please share it, like the video, subscribe here, and stay tuned for more free legal estate planning and financial educational videos.